All right, good morning, everyone. Today's date is, it's June 27th, I believe, 2022. It's a Monday morning, 6:15 a.m. here in the United States, East Coast. Coming to you from the great state of Maine, deep in the heart of Pineland. I am your host, Tom Gazinski. Welcome to Sunshine in Pineland. I want to thank everyone who supports the program as usual. Super chats, we always appreciate them. The Venmo, CVC, PRV, PO Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine 04739, and a bevy of books over there on Amazon and a few on Audible if you like as well. Hopefully you have a chance to avail yourself of those. So anyway, let's get into it. And this morning, and the Lord's blessing be upon you all. What do I want to talk about today? I want to talk about foreign affairs just a little bit, because I feel like with everything else going on, it got backburnered just a bit, and it really shouldn't be. Russia is planning on providing nuclear munitions to Belarus. Lithuania is still holding on this idea that they want to resist allowing Russia to use the train corridor that is, by treaty, considered sort of sovereign Russian territory. It's a little bit complicated how that works out, but this isn't a customs issue, because in theory, that train never leaves Russian territory. It's going across Lithuania and the Suwalki Gap. It's extraterritorial, and this is causing a lot of problems, and a lot of commentators are thinking NATO wants a bigger war, and that they're trying to use the minor Baltic states like Lithuania to expedite that. So we'll see what happens with that, but it's worth mentioning, because let's look at what's happening in world politics today. BRICS just had their big summit, right? That's the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa coalition, and they are working to bring in potentially Argentina, I said it that way on purpose, as well as maybe Saudi Arabia is a country that's been mentioned. Iran is a country that's been mentioned, which that's a little bit of an odd pairing. We'll see how that works out. At the same time, the G7 is meeting in Germany today. For those who don't know your G7, that's going to be the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and who am I missing? The UK. Yeah. Okay. So those countries will be meeting, and they are presently. They also invited Narendra Modi, who is the Indian Prime Minister, which is interesting because he's been a part of BRICS. At the same time, you're seeing the Bank of International Settlement starting to have some conversations with the Chinese about using the reserve yuan. And one wonders if this isn't in response to and an effort to kind of put a cleft between the Chinese and the Russians. But you see these different characters playing different games, and you see alliances forming and reforming over the question of what's going to be a war over dollar supremacy. And the question is going to be, is it going to be a hot war that's going to play out fast, where the West is going to opt for a first strike on the theory that they can't afford to let too many countries hemorrhage off the dollar system and then have to deal with the consequences of what would eventually resolve into a military conflict against Russia, most likely? Or will it be a longer, colder war? And I guess the question, if you want to do that, is you have to look at the West's ability to project power into places like Africa and Latin America, where there are resources, because Asia has its own resources. Not that North America doesn't, by the way. North America and Europe to a lesser extent. But the problem is the nature of the rhetoric and the ridiculous sort of climate change propaganda is such that you won't see the West until desperate times come forward, be willing to harvest its own resources. It's just not something we do. And it's foolish, by the way, but that's neither here nor there. At this point, trying to make sense of why governments do things is beyond us. So we'll have to watch. A lot of things will be revealed if we watch kind of behind the scenes, and I think there's a little time for this to play out. But an interesting side drama in all this to keep an eye on is the Turks, because Turkey's been playing both sides against the middle, much like India has, and there was an announcement that there would be a separate trilateral meeting between the Finnish, Swedish, and Turkish delegations in advance of the NATO summit, which is following the G7 summit, that will be on the 26th. That can't be right. In any case, what we'll see is there's supposed to be, it must be the 29th. I have my days backwards. That must be it. The NATO summit must be on the 29th, because what's happening is I read that there's going to be at least 2 meetings, one between the delegations as a preemptor to start the accession talks of NATO and Sweden. The second case is that Erdogan wants to be involved with this when he's coming to the NATO meeting for the heads of state at the Madrid conference. So we'll see how this all plays out, but it could be just domestic politics playing out. I mean, it's kind of interesting because, as I understand it, Turkey's getting to sell some Russian goods. They are getting some financial help from them as well, because they have a really bad inflation problem. And yet, I don't know. We'll see how it all works out. But it does look like there's at least a possibility that a deal may be struck. And I think we'll know a lot about where Turkey stands. If Sweden and Finland are invited to join NATO by the end of this week, Turkey is going to be seen as playing to the West. If they don't, then I think it won't be too long before Turkey actually ends up on the outs. And that has certain problems and certain benefits. That's a complex situation over there in the Middle East. So we'll have to keep an eye on how that plays out as time goes forward. A lot more chatter going on as well about efforts to form an Asian NATO. Japan is at the heart of these efforts. South Korea having a more, we'll use American terms, it's not really accurate, but a conservative prime minister there, or I should say president, there's a president. The reconciliation between South Korea and Japan is on, with worries of Chinese dominance over in East Asia. So expect to see Australia, and interesting, we'll see how Southeast Asia responds to this. I mean, economically, they're very linked to the Chinese, but, you know, the way China's been posturing about Taiwan, as well as the whole course of Chinese history, I mean, I don't know how many wars Vietnam has fought against China, make it such that while China can find allies in the parts of the world beyond the mountain range it's not used to dealing with them, their near neighbors have a lot less trust of them than any other country. So we'll have to watch how that bit plays out over the next few weeks and how these things resolve themselves. But on the war front, over in Ukraine, Russia continues its advance through Kharkiv. Severodonetsk is the town that was the key linchpin to the Ukrainian defense in the Donbass. It has fallen, and now we are seeing a retreat. And actually, a lot of rumors coming out of Ukraine specifically that the military wanted to organize a retreat more swiftly, and the Zelensky regime wouldn't let them. People are speculating that, you know, maybe the reason for that has to do with the presence of certain Black Ops projects that have to do with the West. And speaking of Black Ops projects, our friend Q is back, so Lord knows you're going to have to deal with those people again. And just, shall we play a game? Yes, play a game, go away. The only way to win. You know, it's interesting. It's interesting that the quote was, shall we play a game? Because the quote is actually from the movie War Games, where this is Computer Joshua's movie from like 1983 or something. Matthew Broderick's in it as a kid. And the end of the movie, you figure out with thermonuclear war, the only way to win is not to play. Which, you know, is really what you have to do with the Q folks. Because they are all, I mean, it's the perfect paranoid fantasy, right? And look, I believe in paranoid fantasy. You all know that. But it's an idea where, oh, there's someone who's magically going to come down. It's secular rapture. That's what it is. Honest to God, that's what it is. If Trump is your Christ, then Q is your secular rapture prophet. That's what it is. And I know that's perhaps a bit strong, and I might piss off a couple people listening to my broadcast. I don't really care, because I'm going to give it to you straight. You respect and appreciate that. Otherwise, why would you be here? You know, and if we disagree from time to time, just take it with a grain of salt, and hopefully, you know, time will prove who was correct. I mean, I've got a pretty good track record. I'll stand on that one. But this idea that, you know, that there's some things that's going to come to the interest of the American people, hard to believe right now, hard to believe. And we saw the hypocrisy in full display this weekend. You know, see people like Maxine Waters, I mean, which isn't surprising, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez go out there and they're saying, you know, the same time they're holding hearings about the terrible sedition caused by Republicans who basically gathered over a stolen election. At the same time, they're saying, oh, we need to burn down the Supreme Court. That, you know, we've had multiple death threats against various justices. And to his credit, by the way, give some love to Justice Thomas for what he's been doing out there, and for his legally correct and morally, promising opinion about what the court should do. It's too bad we have such a weenie like John Roberts in there. And people are like, oh, we're going to go all the way back. Well, yeah, you are. This is the pendulum. I used to run a place called Pendulum. It's going to swing all the way back. And why wouldn't it? Because you know what? If you don't do that in the culture war, things are going to be an absolute mess. Oh, my Lord. Someone must have hit a moose. I saw a dead body, a dead carcass by the side of the road. Maybe I'll call the sheriff once I get home. Can't, my phone wouldn't work here anyway. But anyway, yeah, life in Maine, man. That's terrible. It's good meat, though. I mean, what actually happens, not that you care, but usually what they do is they call up the sheriff or the state police, and they'll bring it to one of the local, there's a lot of places that do animal dressing, and they'll break up the meat, and it goes to food banks, usually, actually, so they don't waste it. So that's actually a really good thing. And having had it, I would say it's pretty good meal. If you like deer, it's pretty good. You'll like that. So, but anyways, life in Maine. And that must have just happened because I went through there about 15 minutes ago, and there wasn't something out there. But all right, so where were we? We were talking about rhino hunting, not moose hunting. The same time, we saw the government pass a gun control bill. Nice to see Republicans stabbing people in the back, as usual. And in that vein, it's interesting. We are seeing an increasing fight, and this is perhaps more interesting, between state-level parties and the national-level party. And this is a healthy thing. The Republican Party at the national level is irredeemably corrupt and cannot be helped. But there are states where you see interesting things happen. A lot of people are talking about the Texas secession thing that the GOP put in there as a plank on the platform for 2023, especially if, let's imagine, the World Health Organization is out there saying monkeypox could be the next, pandemic. And then they say, well, we have to have electoral voting by mail. And Lord knows we trust those ballots, right? And we also have seen that there was a passage of some new regulations. The Federalist was covering this. If you want to go check it out, I don't have the link with me because I'm driving. But they were talking about how basically the federal government changed some of the rules about how people could help others, get voter ballot access. Which, if you want to read between the lines just a little bit, basically they opened up the ability for NGOs to use their war chest to get people's votes to the ballot in ways that I think will be highly problematic come November if we're all still worried about, what this country has to offer us. And I'll just say this, if at the end of 2022, we see a Congress that's still run by the Democrats, Republicans, even the daft Republicans, will be concluding the whole system is fixed, and you will see secession movements that are happening in places like Texas and Florida, and in other states too, move forward, especially as you see the division increase with, for instance, the abortion rules. And watching these people revolt against it, man, they're so stupid. They're like, I watch them revolt in left-leaning states saying, we want our rights, well, the truth, and it's a sad truth. It's not something I take delight in, but the reality is in a state like California, they're probably going to legalize infanticide about 5 minutes from now. And I feel bad for people who live in California who have the issue that you have a corrupt government that is run from the city that is, overwhelming different counties. And I think in as much as you see state secession issues, I know Jefferson's an issue in Northern California, you're going to see also secession issues within states, greater Idaho, the people who are trapped under the madness that is Seattle and Portland who want to get out of that. And, a redrawing of the map is something that could come if things get any more difficult or violent. And then let's keep in the background of all this, and this is why it's unsettled, you got the whole dark winter thing coming along. You have, shutdowns in different energy, overwhelming amounts of our liquid natural gas being exported to Europe. Yeah, to help them, but there's not going to be any supply here. So what's that going to mean? Your prices going up. I know of at least a dozen states where we're seeing electrical prices rise sometimes as much as 100%, where you're going from some states where it was 3 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, jumping up to over 10 in some places. I know heating oil up here in Maine and New England, in places where we're impacted, or if you're in propane jumped from about 2 to 4 from what I can see. Heating oil is up from about 2 to 6 because heating oil is basically diesel with a different blend. And of course the ongoing diesel problem. And even when you see that there's some hope maybe on the horizon there, gas prices have settled for just a little bit because demand is way down, which is going to have other problems. You're going to also see that the rail lines are not even close to keeping up. And that logistics problem, I wonder what that's all about. You're going to have that problem. You're going to have the ports. and you're not going to have goods. So, I mean, if you were a forward-thinking governor, you would start now thinking, hey, how am I going to produce goods in my own state? How are we going to produce enough food? And you'd be subsidizing things accordingly. But since the political class has to pretend everything's okay, what they're going to do is leave the people to their own devices and rot, and then they're probably going to target the people who've actually prepared to try to take the goods from them, much like sort of communists think. They create problems, and then they steal your stuff as the solution to what sort of problems you have. And you know what? At this point, it's easy to point to the left that way, but honestly, the way the right behaves is not that much different. They speak a good game sometimes, but in truth, you shouldn't trust them either. They're all part of the same corrupt oligarchy. So, in any case, we'll have to watch how they continue pushing the inflation ball. They've changed the definition of a recession again, so they don't have to claim we're in one, even though we all know we are. And as we see prices continue to rise on core staple goods, when you're talking food, energy, rent, what you're also seeing is the Fed is trying to kind of desperately, delicately say, we don't want to raise the rates too much because we don't want to hurt the economy, but they're going to have to keep raising it. If they don't raise it, the economists I've been reading say to at least 8%, you're not going to stop inflation. And if you don't stop inflation, what's going to happen is your dollar's just not going to purchase that much. I was doing a little research, and I found out that the British pound used to basically be the world reserve currency before World War II, okay? And, the empire in which the sun never sets. And between 1944 and today, the British pound has lost 5,000% of its purchasing power, which is to say that things for a British person, in theory, or I should say, put it this way, their currency has 1/50th the purchasing power. So a pound back then, or I should say 2 pence back then, was worth a pound today. All right? At least if it's in a base hundred system. You get my point. To use American sense, it's the purchasing power of 2 pennies is equal to $1. And by the way, America's not that much better than that, because our inflation's pretty bad too. If you go back, 50 or 100 years, you go look at the old ads from the 50s and before, where you could buy things for a nickel or a dime and that had purpose. And then you look what happened in the 60s and into the 70s and how the dollar was inflated, and part of that's caught up in gold. Another thing to keep an eye on as relates to that, a ban on Russia being able to import gold. What's that about? My guess, they don't want to face a gold-backed ruble, because that would be very appealing to the third world, and one more effort to get out of the American dollar-based debt-driven hegemony. Now, the good news in the world is that countries are fighting the dollar-based debt hegemony. The bad news is that the overseers are smacking the whip pretty hard against those of us stuck on the old plantation here in the United States in terms of debt management, and what they are doing is we are now running ourselves into a bubble through the credit scores going, not the credit scores, the credit usage for domestic spending going through the roof, government deficit spending, which is ongoing, military-industrial complex spending, which is very big. Did you see that Canada just agreed to spend like $40 billion or something? Not $40 billion, it's like $10 billion on upgrading the NORAD stuff, which is fine. I think that's good. But on the other hand, I mean, they're so beyond broke. It's sort of a weird nominal idea at this point. So. But as you see, the other part of it, which is the demand for new housing going in the tank, that's going to hurt the construction industry. It's also going to do what happened in 2007 all over again. Houses are going to be upside down. People are going to owe more than the houses are worth, because there'll be no market to buy them, because there'll be no finance able to afford it at the rates of interest that are going out there. So people will be stuck, and we will have a housing crisis, where what we'll see people, rents will go up way faster, and people will be stuck under those. On the other hand, interestingly, houses will come down in price, but what will happen is people won't be able to qualify for the financing or afford the financing to buy them. So what will happen is a few people will end up owning everything, because they'll get houses on the cheap, and they'll make money on the back end from the rent, because people can't afford the asset price. And this process, known as collateralization, boys and girls, is what happens in times of scarcity and depression. It's what happened in the 20s and 30s, where a few people got control of a lot of different things. And what actually happened, it's an interesting backstory, you guys like the history of that, so I'll share it with you, is they would have auctions in town where people couldn't afford their mortgage. And what would happen is the whole town would gather, I'm making this up, and there'd be a bunch of guys standing around with shotguns, and families would bid to get their houses back. And in towns where the machine system ran, they were able to steal the property. But in towns where the good old boys ran things, as much as the bankers would want to have people come in and bid, people realized how pissed off people were. And it was often the case that the people who lost their homes got their homes back, especially in communities that were well established and families that were known to the community, because the understanding was that you weren't going to take this from us or we were going to go to war with you. And mind you, it was a much rougher country back then. People don't realize how close America came to Civil War in the 30s. You can go look at some of the things after the bonus army marches. And actually, that's how Douglas MacArthur sort of got famous. He was there for dispersing them. It's interesting how many of your dictators or would-be dictators or your famous generals, Napoleon did something similar for the Directorate in France. They go out there for the head of state and they say, hey, I'll be your guy. I'll shoot the people who are causing you problems. And then they find themselves in positions of great power. You can look at the rise of the whole Bush family as an example of that same sort of thinking being enacted in real time. So we'll see if things happen that way. I mean, I'm not saying anything is that desperate yet, and I do think if things fall off, given the inefficacy of most people, that we'll see it be much more violent and get nastier fast. But ultimately, the question of who owns things if things start falling apart is a fair one. And, I would suggest in a lot of ways the way the Soviets did it wasn't bad when it fell apart. People ended up owning where they lived. And if you don't think that's fair because nicer homes are owned by people with more money, hey, you can figure out something. Have a lottery for the houses that aren't there, and you can choose to give up where you're at. There's ways you can do this. This isn't complicated. But at some point, you're going to have to erase the debt or give your life over to paying for it. And this is really the problem here that we have to deal with. This is interesting. I'm getting a little text message from my phone saying, welcome to Canada, even though I'm 30 miles from the border. I don't know. I must have picked up a satellite somewhere, or a tower. That happens occasionally up here in the North Country. But, yeah, hopefully, well, it doesn't matter. I'm just recording this video. I'm thinking if I'm using bandwidth, but I'm not. So anyway, those are some of the things to keep an eye on. Domestic politics this week. What are we going to be watching for? I wouldn't be surprised if the Democrats don't try to put up in the next few weeks here some sort of a bill to legalize abortion nationwide because they think it's a good voting issue. We've seen some pretty disgusting responses from our government. The Pentagon says they're going to look at how they can provide federally funded abortions in states that don't allow that. That's it's a total violation of the federalism as an ethos too, because a murder is a state law issue, and in jurisdiction, it will be interesting. At some point in the not so distant future, a governor is going to call the federal government to the mat for doing something illegal, and we'll see if someone gets arrested. I mean, could you imagine if a military official gets arrested, say in the state of Florida, for violating their laws, or maybe use Fort Sill in Oklahoma? There's a state they might not be willing to do it in. At the same time, we're seeing the Department of Justice say that we're going to make sure that we intervene to help women have abortions everywhere. Well, that's just one more example that the FBI, yet again, is a political entity at this point. And I know guys who listen to this program who are part of the feds. I mean, of course they do. I've been a dissident forever. I mean, is this really what you want to be a part of? You guys need to have some sort of a revolt within your entity while you still have any credibility whatsoever, because I'm telling you, it's getting to the point where, people look at you like the Stasi, and it's the truth. What do you want me to tell you? You could say, and I know what field guys say, it's like, well, it's the people in Washington. Well, you're writing your checks and you're taking their orders, so what's it going to be? I mean, are you going to be a loyalist, or are you going to do something a little different here? And that's a decision that's going to have to be made pretty soon, and for a lot of us, too. A lot of people, and the thing about it is, maybe there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and people like to imagine it's left versus right, the Civil War, the Republicans, Trump, Biden. It's not like that. It's communities getting back to the ability to meet their own needs, and it's going to be a lot of different choices. And there's a lot of communities that exist that don't meet any needs. They're just destructive to their own people. And you can see it by how some of these people, how some of the abortionists behave. Like these women, I'm going to go out and I'm not going to have any kids ever again. I'm like, well, you've solved your own problem. I mean, the demography will work itself out, or saying like, I'm going to hold out from sex from men. I was just watching 4chan, watching them. I'm like, yeah, you're really threatening the incels. They're upset. I'm like, okay. But, I mean, that's what it is. It's feelings. It's rage. There's no thought. There's no logic. There's no morality. My wife watches these things with me, and she tells me, she's like, don't these people realize how nuts they are? And the answer is they don't, because they've been programmed. And we have to fight the programming, but to fight the programming, we have to be willing to walk out from this and do something different. And that's where we are in the game, to be honest with you. I mean, we've reached the point where something different really needs to be contemplated. Unfortunately, people are either trying to have the last drink, where they're not noticing anything, or they're so far removed from it, there's nothing in between, and that's when this thing falls. It's going to fall hard. I think we'll get to winter. I don't think we get through it. I've said that before. I'll stand on it. We'll keep an eye on what's out there, and that's my update for you this morning. Maybe we'll do a show later. Don't really have anything I super want to talk about, though. I mean, I do think that we're seeing an effort to massively increase political polarization, and I think the government's going to be looking pretty hard to scapegoat someone. And if they have to find someone who's mentally disabled to convince to do something untoward, they'll do it. It's not like we haven't seen that 100 times before. It's a sad situation we live in, but that's what happens when you let crazies run the asylum. You want to avoid that, be smart. You let Christ order your life, and you find people who think the same way around that. Heavenly Father, just pray for everyone to be safe, that they have that you lead them where you want them, and that they find a place for you in their life. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. I'm Tom Kaczynski. Thank you for watching Sunrise in Pineland this morning. I'll be around more this week, and hopefully we'll have some stuff that's interesting to talk about. Always looking for some other stuff. Might talk about some of the AI stuff too. Got to touch on some topics that maybe aren't on the front burner, but that ultimately might blow up the whole house. So always got to keep an eye on that. If you like the program, support it. Go buy the books over on Amazon. Surviving the Fall of America is the new one. Very well rated. So far, nothing less than 5 stars, so that makes me happy. Apparently, the effort was worth it, and I appreciate that, and hopefully it'll be a blessing to you. Also, the Venmo CVC PRV, PO Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine 04739. And now I get to go play with chickens, which is, the bane and joy of my existence, but at least we'll have eggs. So do something to prepare today. Be smart. All right, God bless.